right. Hi, everyone. Glad you can make it out. Hey, Elle. Thanks for coming. So today, just like I've promoted, we're going to go through a live figure drawing session. It's going to be about an hour, so feel free to pause if you need to or come back. But I want to take you through an entire beginner figure drawing class. So today we are going to be featuring Emma Bowman, who is an incredible figure drawing model. She goes by Spin Kitty, and I've put her Venmo right here if you'd like to leave her a tip. Hey Liz, glad you can make it. I hope you're doing well. So I've put her Venmo here if you'd like to leave her a tip, and I've put mine here as well. This is both something that we do for a living. It's just suggested. I don't want you to feel pressure to do it, but this is what I'd be doing for money, usually on a Saturday. So, but with that said, I want you guys to enjoy yourselves. I think this is going to be a ton of fun. So we're going to start off with what's called gesture drawing. So a gesture drawing is basically we're just going to draw the figure in as few lines as possible. This is a warm-up both for us and for the model. And so all you're going to do, and I'm going to kind of treat everybody like this is their very first time, even if it's not your first time, just to put everybody on the same square footing. So with that said, why don't I actually just talk about my materials? It's really simple. All I'm going to be using today is a pencil and an eraser. That's it. And then I have a pencil sharpener close by just in case. That's all you need to. Paper, pencil, eraser. Nothing too fancy today. But with a gesture drawing is basically like a skeleton almost. So if I were to draw a person, or if I were to look at a person and just think about what's going on inside of their body, sorry, I'm just pulling up something really quick. That's what I'm going to be doing as a gesture. So let's say you have somebody just sort of standing normally. If I were going to do a gesture drawing, I would focus first on what I call a action line, or a gesture line. And that's either going to be a C or an S shape, either a line with two curves or a line with a single curve. And then from there, I'm going to build their limbs, their arms and their legs, and then the main structures of their body, so their head, their rib cage, and their pelvis. Okay. So if I were to draw just a normal person kind of standing upright, I would maybe start with a gesture like this. So this is an S curve. And then I would look for the tilt of their shoulder, tilt of their hip. I would draw in their legs, just as lines, their arm, maybe their hands on their hips. And then I would think about how their head, the rib cage, and their pelvis are lined up. And then so that they're not standing on nothing, I might just do triangles for the feet and sort of like ovals for the hands. So this is nothing too complicated. You want to keep it pretty simple. This is basically like a stick figure, but instead of doing your stick figure like this, you're doing your stick figure like this. So we're going to take this pose, or this structure, and we're just going to manipulate it to be doing whatever the model is doing. All right, so let's get started. So to start off, we're just going to have 30-second poses from Emma. So I don't want you to feel rushed. I just want you to try and follow along in the structure of starting with the action line and then doing the tilt of the shoulders and hips, then doing the limbs, and then doing the main structures. So let's get started. Let me pull that up. All right. Here we go. All right. Alright, so for this first structure, I'm going to start with a C curve that goes all the way through her body, that's going from her hands down through her feet. Then I'm going to do this weight-bearing leg, that second leg, that arm coming through the second arm, and then the head, the rib cage, and the pelvis. So even if it's something scratchy like this, that works. And then if you didn't finish, don't worry, just abandon it and we'll move on to the next pose. So for this, again, do a C curve like this. Think about her shoulders and her hips. Have the second leg kind of coming off. Establish that first leg a little better. One arm coming here, the other here. Head, rib cage, pelvis. This is going super fast for you. Really, I don't want you to freak out. This is all about warming up your head, warming up your arm, getting used to the model, allowing the model some time to warm up and get loose. So think of this as stretching. None of this has to be perfect. Mine certainly aren't. But this is just to kind of get you in the zone. Hope you've noticed that I'm holding my pencil by the side like this. If you haven't been holding your pencil that way, I would encourage you to do that. It gives you a lot more control over your curves and a better range of motion. Okay. Also, if you have any questions at all, please put them in the chat. I would love to clarify anything that I'm saying. Make sure that you're feeling like you understand. When you do demos for a class, those are either your best or your absolute worst drawings. So it's hard to draw and think and talk all at the same time. We're going to do 10 of these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we got a couple more. You can see I'm doing these all on the same page. I'm doing them quickly. They're about 8 inches tall. That's probably as small as you want to go. I wouldn't go any smaller than that. I know this might feel really fast, but just do what you can. Again, it's about warming up, not about being perfect. Okay, I ran out of room on my paper. Put it right here. You see, I'm always starting with just a couple of lines. If you have been with me this week for any of our watercolor classes, remember that the big rule is you're always drawing big to small, simple to complex. Okay, there was our first 30 seconds. Hope that was successful for you. Again, if you have any questions about any of that, please drop that in the chat. But I hope everyone did good. Also, please send me your drawings afterwards. I would love to see them if you're drawing along with me. Now, one way to think about it is that a gesture drawing is a lot more like a haiku than an epic poem. So if you go to the museum and you see some of these amazing graphite, or you go to a gallery, you see some of these amazing graphite drawings that are impossibly detailed. That would be something like a epic poem, like Beowulf or something. It spent hours and hours and hours to create something like that. But when you see a gesture drawing, it's a really simple note that's done in as few lines as possible, something more like a haiku. So all you're trying to get across is that single moment. So you're not trying to get across any details about what the person is wearing necessarily, or any sort of physical characterizations of that person. As much as what you're trying to do is just capture that single moment of the pose. And you need to do that in as few lines as possible so that it can be as clear as possible. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to start with the action line, and then tilt, and then limbs, and then forms. But this time we're going to do it in twice the amount of time. So we're going to do 60 seconds instead of 30 seconds. And what that means for you isn't that you need to draw slower. You should try and draw the same speed, but you should think twice as much. So in the 30-second poses, we were sort of just going as they came to us, not thinking too hard, just kind of letting our hand move. But this time I want you to spend a few seconds before you start jumping into the drawing just to think about the pose and what you're seeing and how you might want to show that in your drawing. All right, so ready? These are going to be, I think, 5 60-second poses. Here we go. All right, so we're going to start off with a really classical S pose here. Looking at the tilt of her hips, which you can see from her pants, and then the way that her shoulders are tilting the opposite. Is this the only way to do gesture drawings? Absolutely not. There are many ways. As many artists as there are ways to draw. But I find that it's really helpful to have some sort of structure, especially when you're learning, that you can use sort of a fallback, or a sort of something that you're really familiar with. That way you don't feel ever stuck. You always know what's coming next. Okay, so this line is going to go all the way through her hands, all the way through her feet. She's really compressing her torso here, you can see. So you don't want to rob her of this beautiful pose by under-exaggerating. You can see if I've got any extra time, I'm just using it to define these poses a little more. Hey, Mom. Thanks. All right, so with a compact pose like this, sometimes it's going to be difficult to do the arms and legs in the same way. So you can see I'm starting here with just a couple of lines that don't necessarily represent the bones, but could represent the outside of the form as well. So you can see that's enough to sort of show us what's happening in a general sense in the pose, which is exactly what we want from a gesture drawing. Something that we can build on. It's going to allow us to progress in the drawing and capture this essence of the pose. There we go. I'm starting to feel a little bit more warmed up. I hope you are too. This is going to be kind of just a general overview today. We're going to kind of touch on a little bit of everything. Depending on how it goes and what questions you guys have, we might extend talking about a certain thing. But I just kind of want to get through everything today and kind of feel this out, because this is new for me too. Never done teaching like this except for this week. So, all right. So these are our 5-minute poses. I'm sorry, our 1-minute poses. So now what we're going to do is we're going to jump forward into 3-minute poses. So with a 3-minute pose, obviously you're going to have triple the amount of time that we just had now, which is a lot more time. So what are you going to do with those extra minutes? Let me do this way. We're going to start to get into structure. So structure is basically turning these, sticks into 3-dimensional shapes. So we're going to deal a lot with 3 basic 3-dimensional shapes. We're going to work with, oh good, Liz. Emma's an incredible model. Really love the way she poses. We're going to work with a cylinder. We're going to work with a box. And we're going to work with a sphere. Okay, so these 3 really basic shapes. Now sometimes this cylinder might, bend a little. So it looks more like a macaroni. And sometimes this box might taper. So then we end up with something more like this type of pyramid here. And sometimes this is going to be more like an egg shape, or it's going to be more like somebody squished it, like this, like a bean shape. But it's always going to be based on these three basic shapes: cylinder, box, sphere. That's all you really need. Those are going to be your literal building blocks for being able to build a person. So you've seen those wooden dolls, maybe those wooden maquettes that people use to pose for figures. So basically what we're going to do now is draw one of those. So instead of stopping with just the sticks, we're going to draw an actual person. So let's say I was doing a gesture drawing where there's a person standing like this, and here's their leg, and here's their other leg, kind of coming forward, and then rib cage, head, and maybe their arm was kind of on their hip here, and then this arm was kind of forward like that. Okay, so you have your figure like this. Where do you go from here? Because this is just our gesture drawing. We're going to turn these into boxes and cylinders and spheres. So I'm going to think of the rib cage first. So let's say I'm seeing a little bit of the back of this person actually. So this rib cage, I'm going to turn into a box. Why don't I just jump into a box right away? Well, one, because they're a little bit trickier to draw than an oval, and two, I really want to, a rib cage isn't actually a box shape, it's sort of a mix between a box shape and an oval shape. So I don't want to just get rid of the curved energy, or the energy that a curved line is going to provide me, and the fluidity that it's going to provide me. So I'm sort of balancing back and forth between really fluid gestural marks and then really more anatomically correct structural marks. I'm going to be leaping back and forth as I progress through the entire drawing. I don't want to just go for it right away, because that's going to end up with something that looks weird. Okay, and then let's say their hips are kind of like this. So that's going to be another box there. And then maybe this arm is actually coming down like this, and coming forward like this, and then this hand is on the hip there. So things are kind of changing, but you guys forgive me, right? And then this is this leg kind of going back like this. And this leg is coming forward. This arm is kind of just hanging down by the side. Okay, so this is sort of a structural drawing. It's kind of goofy. I just made it up out of my head, but I hope it gets a point across of two things. One, what it's going to look like when we get through with a structural type drawing, and two, that our gesture drawing really is a guideline, and then our structure drawing is sort of like a check on that guideline where we kind of rein it in back to reality a little bit. Okay, so let's do that now. A few 3-minute poses from Emma. Here we go. There we go. Okay. All right, so we're going to start in the same way. That big S curve. Find the tilt in her shoulders and her hips. Got this foot coming down. This leg behind. Got one arm here. One arm here. staff coming through head, rib cage, pelvis. Okay, so now I still have some time, so I'm going to start to work in the structure here. Now, when I draw on my own, when I'm not teaching, do I do this amount of structure? No, I don't. But when I'm drawing in a figure drawing session, or if I'm teaching, I always, not always, but I mostly do this amount of structure because it helps me to, it's as much of a mind exercise as it is a drawing exercise. Helps me to start thinking three-dimensionally. What's going on with these limbs? Which way are they facing? Are they coming towards me? Are they flat? Are they moving away from me? Are they above my eye line? Are they below my eye line? It gets me to think about all of that stuff. Okay. And I want to think about those things because when it comes to drawing realistically and rendering and starting to put light and form and shape, skin and cloth and all of that stuff, it starts to get pretty difficult. There's a lot of stuff to keep track of, so I want to make sure I have this amount of structure memorized, that I understand the way the body's put together, so that I don't get caught off guard down the road. And if you're drawing faster than me, well, that's fine, but probably slow down because I feel like I'm drawing pretty fast. If you're drawing slower than me, don't freak out at all, especially if this is something that you're new to doing. But try to get to a point where you are as comfortable as possible. And again, these drawings that I'm doing in this sort of style that I am drawing in is what I would call very much an academic type approach to figure drawing. If I was drawing animated characters, would I draw in this same way? Maybe not this exact same way. I would use some principles. So I've got my gesture here, and I'm going to start to think about my structure. Something very rare is happening here where I'm seeing the top of the rib cage. So we're going to do this, and then we are going to jump into 5-minute drawings. And then we'll get into some 10 and end off with a 20. So we really have time to explore your drawing. The reasons why I think it's important to practice drawing structurally like this is because of the complexity of the human body. Let's say that you are on some sort of assignment, if you want to be a professional artist, where you need to draw specific people in specific poses, like let's say you're storyboarding. You're not always going to have references available to you that are exactly what you need them to be. But if you can draw structurally like this, you can find a reference that's close enough and then take this pose and flip it, rotate it, up, down, change the camera angle, put a wide angle lens on it, put a short angle lens on it, and you'll be able to understand fundamentally what's happening and make the changes that you need to make without having to worry. So it's very much going to be to your advantage, even if this feels like math class or something in the realm of the artist world, to learn this type of structure and anatomy. I think we got 1, 2 more here. Start with my gesture line, mark off where her limbs are. Notice I usually start with the legs. There's a lot more weight down here. I don't want my figures to feel like they're floating in the middle of space. I want to try and make them feel like they're grounded. So not only am I thinking about the forms as I'm drawing, I'm also trying to think about where's the weight. If I was in that pose, where would my weight be balanced? It's a little messy. There we go. Right now, I'm keeping an eye on my anatomy as far as proportion is concerned. But I'm not doing a lot of measuring. We are going to talk about that in a minute. How to do a little bit more measuring. This is, again, a little bit more, for me, or for us right now, an exercise of the mind. We're really trying to, as concisely and clearly as possible, explain every direction of each part of the body. Okay. All right. So we're going to do a couple more threes, but let's pause to talk about foreshortening. So foreshortening, I hope this is how you spell it. Foreshortening is when you look at a person or an image and part of their body is shorter than you usually think it would be because you're looking at it in a two-dimensional way. So for example, this leg, if I measure from the top of her head to the bottom of her pelvis, that should be about equal to the length of her leg, right? And each segment of her arm should be the same size. So the segment here is the same as the segment over here. But then if we look at this arm right here, this segment here is much longer than that segment there, right? This segment is ending here instead. Oh, okay, so this segment is much longer than this segment here, okay? The reason for that is because it's an optical illusion. There's foreshortening. It's coming towards you in the camera. So it looks in two-dimensional space like it's shorter. So the example that I like to give is, imagine there's a can of tomato soup on your counter. Could be chicken noodle, could be cream of broccoli, whatever type of soup you like. If that soup can tips forward off the counter, first it tips, it looks like this. Okay, it's the same soup can, but what you're seeing is that the top and the bottom are becoming rounder, and the sides are becoming shorter. Okay, and then if it continues to tip off the counter, this becomes really round, these become really short, and then finally it lands flat, and here's the top of the can, right? So we can feasibly believe in these 4 stages that this can is the same as this can, even though it's an entirely different shape, because we're thinking of it 3-dimensionally instead of 2-dimensionally. So that's going to happen a lot in your figure drawing, and just a general concept that is good to familiarize yourself with. All right, so let's jump into a couple more 3-minute poses. There we go. With that idea of foreshortening in mind. Okay, so first I'm drawing very gesturally. I'm looking at angles between landmarks. So I've drawn this line, or this leg way too long, and this leg should be more like here. And then I'm gonna start jumping into structure, so I'm thinking about her ribs and her rib cage, about the width of her leg, the width of this leg as a cylinder. So starting with a gesture, working into the structure. In this case, we didn't have a lot of foreshortening in the legs at all, but we did have some foreshortening here in the arm. Okay, so in this piece, in this pose, we're going to have a lot of foreshortening in her legs. Just starting with gesture, simple lines, kind of get me grounded, thinking about a pose. Okay, and then I'm going to start to get into some structure. So in her legs here, if I were to draw these as cylinders, they're coming almost directly at us. So these ends of the cylinders are going to be like circles. And then from here to here, well, we've got the legs that then turn into the feet. Those cylinders are slightly going away from us, but they're much longer. Okay, we've got another example of foreshortening here in the arm. That arm is going to be coming towards us like that. Try not to jump around too much. This is a really good example here of, I think I made this way too long. I think this would be more like here. And then I would shift this leg up to here. Sorry, I was thinking two thoughts at the same time. So this is a really good example here of what happens with your neck muscles. So I see a lot of times, and if you're one of my students, you've definitely heard me talk to you about this before, but I see a lot of times people doing their necks like this, where we have this person and then we have these two sort of J's that are going either direction. This is always going to end up kind of looking stiff and wrong, because that's not really what happens with the anatomy of our neck. So if I have a head here, and then I want to draw the neck, I'm always going to draw two lines that are parallel with each other. So if I'm looking at someone straight on, maybe these lines are just going straight down, but they're going to move down past, because they're attaching down here at your collarbone. You have this muscle that goes right here from your ear all the way down to your collarbone. And then you have these other muscles, your trapezius muscles, that make up, where your shoulders start. So it's two separate sets of muscles that are going up your neck. So if I look at it from the side, it's going to be two lines that are going parallel to each other. And then we have our trapezius muscle, which is going to come through here. And then our collarbone and our pectoral muscle up here. All right, so let's move forward. Okay, so now what are we going to do next? We've moved from 3-minute poses. Now we're going to jump into 5-minute poses. I'm going to change my pencil cancel because that one was breaking. We're going to move into 5-minute poses. So the 5-minute pose, you have more than enough time to start to get this down. So we're going to move into our next step, which is going to be blocking. Oops. Blocking in. Okay. So far, up to this point, we've been really concerned with what's going on in the inside of the body, what's going on with the direction that things are placed. We're not really worried about Emma's hairstyle or her clothing or any specifics really about her, about the way that she looks. We're mostly just focusing in on the structure and the anatomy. Which is why it's so important, because then if you're an illustrator, let's say, and you want to create like a fantasy creature, you could start from a structure drawing like this and then push it into any direction that you want. But now we're going to start to get into actually wanting to draw Emma. And so the way that we're going to do that is we're going to start to pay attention to the outside contour. So a contour is basically just the outside of something. So this is the contour of a circle or a sphere, right? Now, curved objects are pretty difficult to get right off the bat. So instead of going straight for a curved object, what we're going to do is what's called a block in, where we're going to use straight lines in order to give us this sort of idea of the contour, and then we can round off these straight lines in order to get the shape that we want. Okay? You can see that was even a better looking circle, I think, than this one, which is the whole point. So I'm going to flip to a new page. We're going to do some 5-minute poses. With a block in. So we'll have a break. First, I'll kind of just let you go for it, and then we'll talk about it a little more. I think I've been doing more talking than I expected to do, so this is going pretty long. I wanted to keep it close to an hour, so I think what we'll do after this let me get that so you can see it. Did that thing where I started talking, or I started trying and I stopped thinking. What I was going to say is that maybe we'll go a little shorter and not do both 10 minutes. Maybe we'll just do one. So keep it around an hour and a half, close to 2 hours. Unless there's anyone in here that would feel gypped. So if you're listening right now and you want to make sure that we do the whole thing, let me know. It's not like I have anywhere to go. Put my head way too small. Okay, so I sort of have my structure drawing going here. And I'm going to start to get into my block in. So I'm going to use straight lines and angles describe the outside of her form. Okay, and once I have that established, I can start to get into, start to lighten this up a little. And using round lines to describe these forms a little more accurately. I wish I could play music, but when I've tried to play music in the past, it's my stream's been stopped for copyright infringement, and most non-copywritten music is not great to draw to. So feel free to turn on some music at home. I usually draw with music on. Some people don't like it. I feel like it helps me get in the right mindset. If you're one of those people that always draws to music, like me, let me know what you listen to. Be very interested. I have a habit of making legs a little too long. So I'm double checking the angle between the knee and the foot here. Using my pencil like this, trying to find the exact right angle. Like that. And comparing that to my drawing to see that my foot should actually be way up here. So you can see with this extra time, I'm not necessarily drawing slower like I was saying before. Instead, I'm actually just double checking my work a lot more. Okay, I'm going to start to get into my block in. Oh, okay. So it's just those two. Okay, so those were our 5 minutes. I hope that was fun. So let's go 5 minutes. Oh, that was our 3 minutes. Next we have 5 minutes. So it's 2 more minutes than we just did. With our 5 minutes, I want you to start to really get into the shadows that you're seeing. So Emma has a directional light on her. So let me just pull up some of those 3-minute poses again. So Emma's got a directional light on her coming from the right side. So on her body, you're going to see very distinct shadows. So on her back there, this is her torso. Right, so if this is her torso, she's got this very, very distinct shadow on her arm here. And on her torso here, that kind of comes down like this. And then on her leg here, which comes around like this. Right? So what we're going to do with our 5 minutes is we're going to do our gesture drawing, and then we're going to do our structure drawing, and we're going to do our contour drawing, and then we're going to start to add in our shadow shapes. Okay, so what I mean by shadow shape is this right here. This shape right here. So if I draw it over here, it looks like this. This is a shadow shape. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's the shape of the shadow. The shape is over here, like that. Okay, so why do we think of shapes or shadows as shapes instead of just as scribbly lines? Well, I see a lot of students that was 5 minutes, wasn't it? So we're going to do I've lost track. I see a lot of students when they're putting a shadow. So let's say the light is coming from this direction here. I'll just kind of scribble in a shadow like that. This doesn't give us a lot of control to explain the image very much. So let's say instead, just put a sphere right here. Light's coming from up there. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to outline where that shadow would be, where the separation between the light side and the dark side is. And I'm going to fill in that shadow. And then I have a lot more control over the shape of my shadow, and I have a lot more control over my rendering as well. Just trust me on this one. It's going to be really important when we get into more complex shapes. Like let's say, for example, I wanted to do an eye. Instead of just drawing this, which looks just like an eye, I could focus more on the shapes of the shadows. And end up with something like this, which is arguably a much more realistic looking eye, even though it has a lot less detail and lines. This is the power of shadow shapes. Okay, so let's jump into, let me look back at what we've done. I think we have done our 5-minute sessions. Okay, so now what we're going to do is jump into our 10-minute. So for this, instead of a video, it's going to be a picture. So our 10-minute, here's one that I did earlier. So this is what I want you to try and shoot for a 10-minute drawing. So you can see in here, I've got my structure. I've got my, zoom out enough. I've got my block in, and then I've added in my shadow shapes and started to add in some bits of detail, like the fingers, hands, her eye, earlobe, hair, that sort of thing. Okay, so this is going to be a 10-minute drawing we're going to do together. The other thing that's going to be different about this is instead of just jumping right into it, because I've got a lot more time, I'm going to sort of put a map out on my paper of where I want everything to go. Okay, so let me pull up this first 10-minute pose. Here we go. Okay. So if I want to draw this, first thing I'm going to do, let me set a timer for 10 minutes too. 1 second. Okay, there we go. All right, so instead of just jumping into the gesture drawing, I'm going to make a couple marks on my paper. Where I want the top of her head to be. I'm going to kind of think of this triangle. See, she's leaning on the stool there, right? So I want my general figure to fit within something like this triangle to give me a good idea about kind of where things are going to go. And then I'm going to jump into my gesture line. I've got her torso kind of coming through like this, and then her hips and her legs kind of going through like that. This might all explode. This might go out of what I'm doing right now as I continue to check and look at different landmarks. But I need somewhere to start other than just a blank white piece of paper and then go. Because if I do that, I'm definitely going to end up with a lot of anatomical mistakes. I don't want to do that. Okay, so I'm thinking about how there's this stretch on this side of her body, and there's that compression on this side of her body. Her arms are tilted like this. Her shoulder, this shoulder is higher than this shoulder because there's a lot of weight being put on that arm right there. Thinking about structure. These foreshortened shapes. So this leg is kind of coming down like this. And then it's moving back in space. So this is foreshortening down here as well. Okay, so I get to about this point where I've got my gesture and my structure kind of in there. And then what am I going to do? I'm going to stop because, again, I have a little bit more time. I'm going to stop what I'm doing and I'm going to start to double check things. So I'm going to check the angle between her knee and her shoulder. Why am I doing that? They're two bony structures, so they're pretty reliable as they're positioning. And it looks like, okay, this angle like that between the knee and the shoulder is exactly where I want it. But this doesn't look exactly right to me, so I know that there's something off. So I'm going to look at the angle between the side of her head and the... oops, that's even worse. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to look at the angle between the side of her head and her shoulder. Okay, there we go. I feel like this head just got a little bit too small, a little bit too much to the left, so I'm going to move it over here. And I'm making these changes now because they're easy to make now. If I get into my details and stuff, I'll never be able to make big changes like that because I'm too far gone. I'm too far into the picture. That's her hand there. My logo is sort of covering up her foot. I can't really see what's going on. Okay. Now I want to start to get into my block in. Hand right here. Shoulder here. Portrait there. I should mention that I am drawing with this pad, not on a flat surface, but on my lap, so that I can see it a little bit better. And I recommend that you do the same. When you put the board up or on a flat surface and you sort of hover over it or your paper, then you're sort of creating this optical illusion where, just like if you are driving and you see the stop ahead or a head stop, how it's all stretched out on the ground, you're going to kind of create that effect in your drawing, which you don't want. Okay. And now I'm going to get into the shadow shapes. So I'm going to be really general and simple at first. Check on her face, her hair. As I'm saying that, I'm realizing that it might be creating that effect for you already. There we go. Yeah. So I have a rule that I tell my students, which is never draw two curves. You can just draw one. Especially as you're planning out your drawing and you're in your preliminary stages. You want to try and keep things as simple and designed as possible. Because you have a lot of time to break, those shapes up down the road. We're doing longer drawings. Let me see how much time we have left. We have 1 minute left. So maybe I'll take this time to establish. Oh, I forgot about this hand. Oh, this pencil doesn't erase. I'm going to switch to something else for the next one so that I can clean up my drawing a little better. I've got 30 more seconds. So keep going. Get the character of her hair. Just put up her hand a little. Okay, so did I go for a lot of detail? No, I did not. I don't want to worry about detail right now. I'm really just trying to design the form. If I was doing a 6-hour drawing, 10-hour drawing, a 20-hour drawing, most of my time would be spent, okay, that's 10 minutes. Most of my time would be spent getting to this point right here. Really getting it right. Because once I get to this point, I'm going to try and zoom in there a little bit. Okay, so once I get to this point, that's sort of the point of no return. I can't make big changes to my anatomy after this. So I really want to establish getting to this point and worry about getting to this point before I move on. Okay, we're just going to go through all of them. So let's go here. I'll set the timer for 10 minutes. Here we go. Okay, so again, I'm starting with my gesture, but it's not, I'm just using a couple lines to sort of establish, okay, here's the leg, here's the other leg. I also want to take some time to think about what we call the envelope shape. So this is where the arms are going to be, this is where the foot's going to be, this is where the top of the head's going to be, this is where her hip's going to be, and that foot is going to kind of fall along right in that line. Now when I get a little more experienced, I'm not going to have to draw these lines every time. I'm sort of just going to do them in my head. But since I'm not experienced yet, I do them. And now I'm going to do my gesture. Got my head. My arms. My rib cage and pelvis. Let's see, this leg is actually coming out a little farther. 1 foot. 2 feet. You guys are having a relaxing afternoon. It's been pretty crazy. This is just as much practice for me as it is for you. This has been nice. Okay, so we've got about 5 minutes left. I'm going to start thinking about my block-in. My shadow shapes. Oops. general with my shadow shapes at first. Trying to establish that design of the lighting. Oh, lost track of time. Let's see. Got 1 minute left. So all I'm doing now is establishing the shadows. And then once I've established the shadows, I'm starting to put in the darker shadows. So the shadows that are like 2 steps or 1 step darker than the general shadow. So for example, we've got this shadow on her chest here. It's absolutely in shadow because we can see how light it is right here on her oblique. So on her chest she has a shadow here, but then on her neck, because of her shoulder, she's got an even darker shadow. So I'm establishing that darker shadow right here between her pectoral. Oh, that's time. That's 10 minutes. So you can see how easy it is to sort of start to get lost in things. All right. Let's do one more, and then we'll be finished for today. Everyone's been having a good time. Let's change that over to 20. Okay, 20 minutes. This will be our last drawing today. Thank you to everyone who stopped by. Hope you had a good time. I know I did. Stretching my muscles here. Again, if you didn't notice it, down in the left-hand corner is Venmo tags for Emma and myself. Emma's a really amazing figure model. We're really blessed that she was so so willing to do this. So I would appreciate it if you dropped her a tip, because she is sort of pioneering this idea with me. And gave me really, really good, wonderful content. So she deserves it. So I'm starting with just a really general gesture drawing. I'm going to start to measure angles. So I'm like measuring the angle between the top of her head and her hand. Top of her head and her other hand. Her hand and her foot. And her hand should be somewhere around here. Let's move this a little bit. There we go. So I'm thinking about my structure here because she's got such a stretch here in the arch of her back, where we're seeing the rib cage kind of come through right here, and then the pelvis here. We've got her arms. Here. Foot here. So I'm trying to get into my block in here. The staff she's using is really cool. I love the curve of it. bit hard to see what's going on with the knees here, but I believe the second knee is here. This leg is in front. Like that. And then this leg, we're mostly just seeing the foot back here. So there must be some extreme foreshortening. So this is the bottom of that leg coming through like that. Something along those lines. Okay, so now that I've got my structure mostly blocked in, I'm going to start to get into the shadows. I'm going to probably go way more into that in another video. But again, I just mostly wanted this to be an overview, kind of show you everything, get myself used to this format and to drawing in front of people. And then we can come back next week, do it again. And we can maybe tackle some of the questions that you guys have, or get into the nitty-gritty of some of these ideas. So you can see here I started with a just a straight line for her arm, but she has a very defined, what is that called? Shoulder muscle, deltoid, and bicep. And so I don't want to, not show that. But I also don't want to try and draw it right off the get-go, so I start with this structure idea. And then I get into that arm. It's sort of all in shadow. Same thing over here. These are all just straight lines at the moment. So at this point, I have to go back into, remember earlier I was talking about there's sort of a balance between straight line structure and gesture. So because I feel like I've got this structure pretty established, I feel good about pushing back into my gestural lines and really trying to find connections between shapes. And bringing that life back into what's happening. So again, if you did follow along today, please, I'd love to see your drawings. And if you post them anywhere, make sure you tag M&M Spin Kitty is her Instagram handle. I think on most media. Or if you just want to shoot her a message and say thank you, I'm sure she'd appreciate that. I'm extremely appreciative. For her sending such quality poses so that I could spend an hour and a half or so doing what I love to do. Yeah, I'm looking at my screen and it's looking like the view that I'm giving you guys is pretty distorted. So that is something I'm going to work on this week. Getting that a lot more trustworthy. So that if you are following along with me, it's not a complete disaster. I mean, it's not like I'm doing perfect anyway, but it would be helpful to you, I think, if you could at least see what I was doing a little clearer. we still got 2 minutes. So at this point, what I'm doing is I'm just coming in and I'm starting to put in a couple details. I'm not going crazy with details, mostly because I don't like to. I really like to get that statement solid before I go into any sort of detail whatsoever. So until I'm totally happy with the statement that I've made with the drawing, this eraser's totally falling apart, then I'm not going to get into any sort of small details. And I'm trying to find those areas that are really going to explain that statement and make sure I emphasize those. Like, for example, the waistband of her pants, the elastic band of her sports bra. Those really help to show that the arch in her back. Okay. So that's 20 minutes. I'm just turn off the alarm here. Okay. So this is my, let's see. Let's get back. So this is my 20-minute drawing. I hope that you guys drew along. Hope you had fun. Thank you so much for joining me, those of you who did. I plan on doing this again. I have a couple other models lined up. Oh, look, this is almost a full 2 hours. So I plan on doing this again. So if you enjoyed yourself, make sure you let me know. Make sure you post your drawings like we talked about before. If you feel very appreciative, again, I've put mine and thanks, Liz. Mine and Emma's Venmo names. I really appreciate if you tipped Emma. She did a really wonderful job with these poses. It's been really fantastic to draw with you, and I will see you guys next week. Stay safe.